There's something about being born into wealth that makes life both a blessing and a curse. For the girl in this story, her family had built an empire that spanned everything from real estate to tech companies. By the time she turned 27, she was already one of the youngest billionaires in the world. But with all that money came complications, ones most people wouldn't expect. You see, when you're worth billions, it's hard to tell who's genuinely interested in you versus your bank account. Every guy who approached her seemed to have ulterior motives. Some were smooth talkers, others tried too hard to impress, but none of them felt real. She was tired of shallow conversations and relationships that fizzled out as soon as someone realized they weren't getting what they wanted. It got to the point where she stopped believing anyone could truly care about her for who she was inside. Her best friend, however, refused to let her give up hope. "Listen," her friend said one evening over coffee. "I know exactly what you need: a blind date." "A blind date?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Really? Do you think I haven't been on enough bad dates already?" "No, hear me out," her friend insisted. "This guy is different, trust me. He's not after your fortune. He works with kids, helps communities, and honestly, he doesn't even seem fazed by flashy stuff like cars or designer clothes." Adioim. First, she hesitated. Blind dates sounded risky, especially given her track record. But then again, maybe this was her chance to prove whether love could exist without dollar signs attached. Still, she wasn't going to jump in blindly, pun intended. If this guy was as genuine as her friend claimed, she'd put him through a little test, one designed to reveal his true intentions. The idea came to her late at night while lying awake, staring at the ceiling. What better way to find out if someone liked her for herself than by pretending to be someone else entirely? So, instead of showing up as the billionaire everyone knew her to be, she decided to disguise herself as a struggling waitress. That way, she could observe how he acted around someone who didn't come with a platinum card or private jet lifestyle. She spent days planning every detail of her transformation. First, she borrowed an old uniform from a local diner, a faded black apron paired with plain white sneakers. Then, she toned down her appearance, swapping her usual glamorous look for oversized glasses, no makeup, and hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Finally, she practiced speaking in a softer tone, mimicking the kind of nervous energy a young waitress might have during her shift. When the big day arrived, she couldn't help feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. She told herself it was just an experiment, nothing more. But deep down, part of her wondered if this date might actually turn into something meaningful. After all, if there really was someone out there who could see past her wealth and appreciate her for who she truly was, wouldn't that be worth finding? With her heart racing slightly faster than usual, she walked into the cozy cafe where they agreed to meet. Dressed as a waitress named Lila, she scanned the room until she spotted him sitting at a corner table. Her breath caught for a moment, not because of his looks, though he was undeniably handsome, but because of the way he carried himself. There was a calmness about him, a warmth that radiated even before he noticed her approach. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself why she was here: to test him, to uncover the truth behind his intentions. Little did she know, this single decision would set off a chain of events neither of them could have predicted. As she sat down across from him, introducing herself as Lila, she braced herself for whatever might happen next. One thing was certain: this wasn't going to be just another ordinary date. The moment she introduced herself as Lila, the waitress, she felt a strange mix of nerves and curiosity. Would he see through her disguise, or would he fall for the act she was putting on? She wasn't sure which outcome she wanted more. As they began talking, though, something unexpected happened. She found herself relaxing. His voice had a calming quality to it, like he wasn't trying too hard to impress her or make things awkward. He started by asking simple questions. Where did she work? How long had she been waiting tables? She answered carefully, sticking to the story she'd rehearsed but adding little details to make it sound believable. To her surprise, he didn't press her for more than she offered. Instead, he shared bits about his own life, how he taught at a school in a low-income neighborhood, How rewarding yet challenging it was to work with kids who dreamed big despite their circumstances. What struck her most was how passionate he sounded when he spoke about his students. He told her stories about a boy who struggled with math but refused to give up, and a girl who wrote poetry so beautiful it brought tears to his eyes. There was no arrogance in his tone, no hint of trying to show off. He just seemed genuinely excited to share these moments with someone who cared to listen. She couldn't help but notice how different this felt compared to the usual dates she went on. Those men often talked about their cars, their vacations, or their latest business deals. They'd drop names of famous people they knew or casually mention how much they spent on dinner. But here was someone who didn't seem to care about any of that. In fact, when she tried steering the conversation toward wealth, casually mentioning how some of her coworkers dreamed of winning the lottery or owning fancy houses, he shrugged it off. "Money's nice," he said with a small smile, "but it doesn't solve everything. I've seen plenty of kids who come from wealthy families, and honestly, sometimes it makes things harder for them. They grow up thinking they don't have to try because everything's handed to them." Her eyebrows shot up at that. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Most people assumed having money meant life was perfect, but hearing him talk about its limitations made her think twice. For the first time in ages, she felt like she wasn't being judged based on her bank account, or rather the lack of one since she was pretending to be poor. As the evening wore on, they moved from serious topics to lighter ones. He joked about his terrible cooking skills and admitted he once burned water while trying to boil pasta. She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. When she told him about a fake disaster story involving a tray of food she supposedly dropped during a busy shift, he chuckled and said, "Sounds like we're both professionals at messing things up." By the end of the night, she realized she hadn't thought about her billionaire status once. It was strange, almost freeing, to sit across from someone who treated her like an equal. And yet there was still that nagging voice in the back of her mind reminding her why she was really here, to test him, to see if he'd change his tune once he discovered the truth. Before leaving, he asked if she'd like to meet again. Part of her wanted to say no, to walk away and never look back. After all, keeping up this charade wouldn't be easy. But another part of her, the part that had enjoyed laughing with him, listening to his stories, and feeling like she could just be herself, couldn't resist saying yes. Over the next few days, she replayed their conversation in her head. She kept picturing the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his students, the sincerity in his voice when he said money didn't define happiness. Could someone like him really exist? Someone who valued kindness over wealth, authenticity over appearances? Despite her doubts, she agreed to see him again. This time they met at a park. The weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold, and they spent hours wandering along the paths, stopping occasionally to watch ducks swim in the pond or admire flowers blooming in bursts of color. He pointed out constellations in the sky, explaining their names and meanings with the same enthusiasm he showed when talking about his students. She listened intently, soaking in every word. At one point, he turned to her and said, "You know, you're really easy to talk to. Most people either don't get what I do or lose interest after 5 minutes. But you actually seem to care." Her cheeks flushed, partly from embarrassment and partly from guilt. If only he knew the truth, that she wasn't just pretending to care. She truly did. Somewhere along the way, her experiment had started, feeling less like a test and more like a chance to connect with someone special. But the closer they grew, the harder it became to keep up the lie. She began second-guessing herself. What would happen if he found out she wasn't really a waitress? Would he feel betrayed, hurt, angry? And even worse, what if he stopped seeing her as the person she'd become during their time together and started focusing only on her money? One afternoon, while grabbing coffee before heading to another meeting with him, she overheard two women chatting nearby. One of them mentioned attending a charity event hosted by none other than her own company. Her stomach dropped. That was supposed to be a small private gathering, a chance for donors and community leaders to mingle. And then it hit her. He might be invited too. Panic set in as she realized how complicated things were about to get. How could she juggle being a waitress and a billionaire without getting caught? More importantly, how could she continue lying to someone who was starting to mean so much to her? For now, though, she pushed those thoughts aside. She had another date to focus on, another opportunity to spend time with someone who made her feel like she didn't need to hide behind her wealth, or pretend to be someone she wasn't, even if it was just for a little while longer. As the days turned into weeks, their connection grew stronger. Each meeting felt like a new chapter in a story she didn't want to end. They spent hours together, walking through parks, grabbing coffee at little cafes, and even exploring art galleries on rainy afternoons. He had this way of making everything feel special, even the simplest moments. Like the time they shared a bag of popcorn while sitting on a bench, watching kids play soccer in the park, or when he paused in front of a painting in the gallery and said, "This reminds me of you," before quickly adding, "I mean, not that I know much about art or anything." She laughed at his awkwardness, but deep down, it touched her. No one had ever compared her to something as beautiful as a painting. Of course, he didn't realize he was complimenting a version of her that wasn't entirely real. That thought kept gnawing at her conscience, louder with each passing day. But then there were moments when she forgot all about her disguise. When they sat by the lake talking about random things like their favorite childhood memories or silly fears, they weren't two people from different worlds anymore. They were just two humans sharing pieces of themselves. And for those brief moments, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have something real. Still, reality had a way of creeping back in. One evening, during one of their casual chats, he mentioned something that made her heart skip a beat. His school was partnering with a major corporation to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. The company's name? Her own. Her mind raced as he explained how excited he was about the project. "It's such a great opportunity for my students," he said, his eyes lighting up. "The CEO is supposed to visit soon too. I think we're meeting next week." "Oh," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. She forced a smile, pretending to be interested, but inside, panic was setting in. How could she possibly keep up this charade if their paths were about to cross, not as waitress and teacher, but as billionaire and partner in a charity initiative? That night, lying in bed, she replayed the conversation over and over in her head. She couldn't avoid the inevitable forever. Sooner or later, he'd meet the real her, the woman behind the empire. What would happen then? Would he recognize her? Would he put two and two together and realize she'd been lying to him all along? Desperate to buy herself some time, she started fabricating excuses. She told him she needed extra shifts at the diner because they were short-staffed. She canceled plans last minute, claiming work emergencies. At first, he seemed understanding, but she could tell he was starting to notice the pattern. "You've been busy lately," he remarked one afternoon, when she finally agreed to meet him for lunch. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, totally fine," she replied quickly, forcing another smile. "Just, life." He nodded, though she could see the concern in his eyes. "Well, if you ever need to talk, I'm here." His kindness only made her feel worse. Here she was, lying to someone who genuinely cared about her, or at least cared about the person he thought she was. The guilt weighed heavily on her chest, but she didn't know how to fix it without ruining everything. Things took a turn when he invited her to a charity gala hosted by her company. It was supposed to be a small, intimate event, a chance for donors and community leaders to celebrate the scholarship program. But for her, it felt like a ticking time bomb. "I don't know." She hesitated when he brought it up. "These kinds of events aren't really my thing." "Come on," he urged gently. "It'll be fun. Plus, it means a lot to me. You'll get to see firsthand how your support is helping these kids." She swallowed hard, knowing she couldn't refuse, without raising suspicion. Reluctantly, she agreed, already dreading what was to come. On the night of the gala, chaos erupted. Dressed in an elegant gown as herself, she mingled with guests, shaking hands and posing for photos. Meanwhile, disguised in a modest dress as Lila, she snuck around trying to stay out of sight. It was exhausting, juggling two identities in the same room. Then, disaster struck. While chatting with a group of attendees, she spotted him across the room and he was looking directly at her. Before she could react, he walked over, pulling Lila aside. "Hey, I wanted to introduce you to someone," he said, dragging her toward none other than herself. Her stomach dropped as she realized there was no way out. Standing face to face with her own reflection, she froze. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then, unable to bear the weight of her lies any longer, she blurted out the truth. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm not who you think I am." To her astonishment, he didn't look angry or betrayed. Instead, he smiled softly and said, "I know." Confused, she stared at him. "What do you mean, you know?" He chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "I figured it out a while ago. Your mannerisms, the way you carry yourself. It's hard to miss once you pay attention. But I didn't say anything because I wanted to see where this would go." Relief washed over her, followed by disbelief. "Wait, you've known this whole time?" "Pretty much," he admitted with a shrug. "But honestly, it didn't matter to me. Whether you're a waitress or a billionaire, you're still the same person underneath. And that's the person I care about." Tears welled up in her eyes as she processed his words. All this time, she'd been so afraid of being judged for her wealth, yet he hadn't cared at all. In fact, he'd seen right through her disguise and still chosen to stick around. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe love didn't have to come with conditions. Maybe it was possible to find someone who valued her for who she truly was. Not for the money, the fame, or the status. And as they stood there together, surrounded by glitz and glamour, she realized something important. The most valuable thing in life wasn't wealth or success. It was connection, the kind that made you feel seen, heard, and loved for exactly who you are. The revelation hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unpredictable. She had just confessed everything, her disguise, her fears, her reasons for lying, and now she waited, bracing herself for his reaction. Would he walk away? Yell at her? Or worse, laugh it off and leave her standing there feeling more foolish than ever? But instead of anger or disappointment, he simply smiled. Not a sarcastic smirk or a forced grin, but a genuine warm smile that made her heart skip a beat. "I already told you," he said softly. "It doesn't matter to me who you are on paper. What matters is how you treat people, how you listen, how you care. And honestly, I've never met anyone who does those things better than you." Her eyes filled with tears, partly from relief and partly from disbelief. All this time she'd been so consumed by fear of being judged, fear of being used, fear of losing control, that she hadn't stopped to consider the possibility that someone might actually see through all of it and still choose her. "I don't deserve you," she whispered, shaking her head. "I lied to you. I manipulated you. I didn't trust you enough to be honest." He reached out and gently placed a hand on hers. "Hey, we're all flawed. None of us gets it right all the time. But what matters is that you came clean. You could have kept lying, but you didn't. That takes courage." His words struck a chord deep within her. Courage wasn't something she associated with herself. In her mind, she was always the one hiding behind wealth, power, and carefully crafted facades. Yet here was someone telling her she was brave, for admitting her mistakes, for letting down her guard, for taking a risk. They spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking for the first time without secrets between them. She opened up about growing up in a world where everyone seemed to have an agenda, where relationships felt transactional and love felt conditional. He listened intently, nodding along as she described the loneliness of constantly wondering if people stayed around because they cared about her or because they cared about her money. In turn, he shared stories about his own struggles, how he'd grown up in a modest household, how he'd worked multiple jobs to put himself through college, how teaching had become his calling because it allowed him to make a difference in ways that truly mattered. "I'm not saying my life is harder than yours," he said with a chuckle, "but I think we both know what it's like to feel like outsiders sometimes. Maybe that's why we connect so well. You understand me, and I understand you." She nodded, realizing how true his words were. Despite their wildly different backgrounds, they weren't so different after all. Both had faced challenges that shaped who they were today. Both had learned to navigate worlds that often felt unfair or unforgiving. And both, in their own ways, were searching for authenticity in a world full of pretense. By the end of the night, they left the gala hand in hand, neither caring about the glitz and glamour surrounding them. For the first time, she felt free, not just from the weight of her lies, but from the burden of pretending to be someone she wasn't. Over the next few weeks, they worked hard to rebuild their relationship. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired, and both knew it would take time. She started by being completely transparent about her life, her business dealings, her family dynamics, even the pressures she faced as a public figure. At first, it felt uncomfortable, almost unnatural, to share so much of herself. But the more she opened up, the lighter she felt. He, too, made an effort to meet her halfway. Though he'd known about her wealth for a while, he still needed time to adjust to the reality of dating someone whose lifestyle was so vastly different from his own. They talked openly about their differences, their priorities, their values, their dreams, and found creative ways to bridge the gap between them. One weekend, she surprised him by joining him at his school. She sat quietly in the back of his classroom, watching as he taught a lesson on empathy and kindness. The students were captivated, hanging on to his every word. After class, several of them approached her shyly, asking questions about her job and her hobbies. One little girl even asked if she was famous, which made everyone burst into laughter. Seeing him in his element gave her a newfound appreciation for the work he did. It also reminded her of why she admired him so much. Not because he was perfect, but because he poured his heart into making the world a better place, one student at a time. Inspired by his passion, she decided to get involved too. Together, they expanded the scholarship program, creating opportunities for even more students to pursue higher education. She attended meetings, spoke at events, and worked closely with teachers and administrators to ensure the initiative succeeded. Through it all, their bond grew stronger. They argued occasionally, of course, about finances, about future plans, about silly things like whose turn it was to do the dishes. But they always found their way back to each other. Their disagreements became chances to learn and grow, not reasons to give up. Not everything was smooth sailing, though. There were moments when old insecurities resurfaced. During a particularly stressful week, she caught herself wondering if he'd stick around if she suddenly lost everything. Would he still love her if she wasn't rich anymore? Sensing her unease, he pulled her aside one evening and said, "Listen to me. I fell in love with you, not your bank account, not your title, not your empire, just you, so stop doubting yourself, okay?" His reassurance helped quiet the doubts in her mind, but it also made her realize how much work she still needed to do on herself. Letting go of years of fear and mistrust wouldn't happen overnight. It would take patience, effort, and a willingness to confront her own vulnerabilities. For his part, he struggled with feelings of inadequacy. He worried that he couldn't provide the kind of life she was accustomed to, that he'd never measure up to the high-powered executives and socialites she interacted with daily. "You already give me everything I need," she told him one night, as they lay side by side under the stars. Love, support, honesty, they're worth more than any amount of money. Her words brought tears to his eyes. For the first time, he believed her, not just with his head, but with his heart. As months turned into a year, their relationship transformed in ways neither of them could have predicted. They weren't just two individuals navigating life together. They were partners, teammates, equals. Every challenge they faced only strengthened their resolve to make things work. One evening, as they strolled along the beach hand in hand, he stopped suddenly and turned to face her. "Do you remember our first date?" he asked, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "Of course I do," she replied, laughing. "How could I forget? You thought I was a waitress." "And now look at us," he said, his expression turning serious. We've come such a long way since then. Through all the ups and downs, I've never regretted meeting you. Not for a second. Her throat tightened as emotion welled up inside her. Me neither, she whispered. Taking a deep breath, he dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple yet elegant ring, a symbol of love, commitment, and trust earned over time. I know life won't always be easy, he said, his voice steady despite the nerves evident in his eyes. But I promise to stand by you no matter. What? Will you marry me? Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, unable to speak. In that moment, she realized something profound. Love wasn't about perfection or fairy tales. It was about finding someone who saw your flaws and loved you anyway, who believed in you even when you doubted yourself, and who stood by your side, through thick and thin. And as they embraced under the setting sun, surrounded by waves crashing against the shore, she knew she'd finally found exactly what she'd been searching for all along. The engagement marked a new chapter in their lives, but it wasn't the happily ever after kind you see in movies. Real life rarely works like that. Instead, it was messy, imperfect, and filled with moments of doubt, laughter, and growth. But through it all, they held on to one truth. Love isn't about avoiding challenges. It's about facing them together. After saying yes to his proposal, she felt a mix of emotions, joy, excitement, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She knew their journey wouldn't be easy. They came from two completely different worlds, and blending those worlds would take effort. For starters, there was the issue of how her family and friends might react. Would they approve of him, or would they judge him based on his background? Her worries weren't unfounded. When she introduced him to her parents over dinner at their sprawling estate, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Her father, a man who'd built his fortune through calculated risks and tough decisions, eyed him skeptically. "So," he began, leaning back in his chair, "what exactly do you do for a living?" He didn't flinch under the scrutiny. With calm confidence, he explained his role as a teacher and the impact he hoped to make in his students' lives. He talked about the importance of education, not just as a career path but as a way to shape futures and break cycles of poverty. To his credit, he didn't try to impress or sugarcoat anything. He simply spoke from the heart. Her mother, however, had a different approach. "Darling," she said later, pulling her aside after dinner, "are you sure about this? I mean, he seems nice enough, but your lifestyle, well, it's not exactly compatible with someone who teaches at a public school." She bristled at the comment but forced herself to stay calm. "Mom, compatibility isn't about what jobs we have or how much money we earn. It's about understanding each other, supporting each other, and building something real. He makes me happy, not because of what he does, but because of who he is." Her mother sighed, clearly unconvinced, but dropped the subject, for now. While her family struggled to accept him, he faced his own set of challenges. His friends and colleagues were equally skeptical. Wait, one of his closest buddies said during a casual hangout. "You're marrying a billionaire? Like actual private jet and mansion billionaire?" "Yeah," he replied with a shrug. "But none of that changes who she is as a person. She's still the same girl I fell in love with, the one who laughs at my bad jokes and listens when I talk about my day." His friend raised an eyebrow. "Still, doesn't it feel weird? I mean, won't people think you're only with her for her money?" The question stung, not because it was entirely baseless, but because it echoed the very fears she'd grappled with early on in their relationship. He hesitated for a moment before responding. "I can't control what other people think. All I know is that I love her and she loves me. That's enough for me." Though he sounded confident, the comment lingered in his mind. It reminded him of the gap between their worlds, a gap that sometimes felt wider than others. For instance, when they attended charity galas or high-profile events, he often found himself feeling out of place among the glittering crowd. Conversations revolved around topics he didn't fully understand, like stock portfolios or luxury brands, leaving him unsure of how to contribute. Sensing his discomfort, she pulled him aside one evening after an event. "Hey," she said softly, You don't have to pretend to fit in if you don't want to. Just be yourself. That's all I care about. I know, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. But sometimes I worry I'll embarrass you. Everyone here expects you to be with someone different. You're not embarrassing me, she insisted, gripping his hand tightly. In fact, you remind me why I fell in love with you in the first place. You don't chase status or approval. You just focus on being genuine. And that's rare in a world where everyone's trying so hard to keep up appearances. Her words eased some of his insecurities, but he knew they'd always face obstacles like this. The key was learning to navigate them without losing sight of what mattered most: their connection. Despite the challenges, they refused to let external pressures define their relationship. Instead, they focused on creating a shared vision for their future, one that combined their strengths and passions. They started by working together on the scholarship program, pouring their energy into expanding its reach and impact. One day, while visiting a local school, they met a young boy named Leo. He was bright, curious, and eager to learn, but his family couldn't afford tuition fees for college. Hearing his story inspired them to double down on their efforts. Together, they organized fundraisers, partnered with local businesses, and even gave motivational speeches to encourage students like Leo to dream big. Watching her dive into this work with such enthusiasm made him realize how much he admired her drive and determination. At the same time, seeing him connect with students and teachers reinforced her belief that he was exactly the partner she needed, someone who cared deeply about making a difference. Their collaboration extended beyond the scholarship program. Inspired by their shared values, they launched a community initiative aimed at providing resources for underprivileged families. From hosting free workshops to offering mentorship programs, they worked tirelessly to create opportunities for those in need. Through these projects, they discovered a deeper level of intimacy. It wasn't just about holding hands or sharing meals. It was about aligning their goals and using their unique talents to build a better world. Of course, not every day was smooth sailing. There were times when old doubts resurfaced, threatening to shake the foundation of their relationship. During a particularly stressful week, she overheard a snide comment at a party about how teachers must feel lucky to marry rich women. The remark cut deep, reigniting her fear that people would always judge him unfairly. That night, lying awake beside him, she voiced her concerns. Do you ever regret getting involved with someone like me? Someone whose life is so complicated and scrutinized? He turned to face her, his expression serious yet tender. No, he said firmly. Never. Yes, our lives are different, and yeah, people will always have opinions, but none of that matters compared to what we have. You challenge me, inspire me, and make me want to be a better version of myself. If anything, I'm the lucky one. His reassurance brought tears to her eyes. For so long, she'd carried the weight of other people's expectations, letting them dictate how she viewed herself and her relationships. Now, hearing him speak with such conviction reminded her that true love wasn't about seeking validation from outsiders. It was about finding peace within each other. As their wedding date approached, they took a weekend trip to the mountains to clear their heads. Sitting by a roaring fire wrapped in blankets, they reflected on everything they'd been through. You know, she said thoughtfully, staring into the flames, when I first met you, I thought I was testing you to see if you'd fall for my wealth instead of me. But looking back, I realize I was the one being tested. You showed me that love isn't about conditions or labels. It's about showing up, even when things get hard. And you taught me that vulnerability isn't a weakness, he added, smiling. It's a strength. Opening up to you, trusting you, letting you see the real me. That's what made us stronger. They sat in silence for a while, soaking in the warmth of the fire and the comfort of each other's presence. In that quiet moment, surrounded by nature's beauty, they both understood something profound. Love wasn't about finding perfection. It was about embracing imperfections, growing together, and choosing each other again and again no matter what. And as they prepared to say their vows, they knew they were ready. Not because they had all the answers, but because they trusted each other to figure things out along the way. The wedding day arrived, and it wasn't the grand, over-the-top affair everyone expected from someone of her status. Instead, they chose a small, intimate ceremony tucked away in a quiet garden, surrounded by lush greenery and soft sunlight filtering through the trees. The guest list was short, just close family, a few friends, and some of his students who had become like family to him over the years. As she walked down the aisle, wearing a simple yet elegant dress that hugged her frame perfectly, her eyes locked onto his. He stood there looking dapper in a tailored suit with a nervous smile tugging at his lips. For a moment, everything else faded. The rustling leaves, the chirping birds, even the gentle breeze brushing against her skin. It was just the two of them, standing at the threshold of a new beginning. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to their union, there was a brief pause before laughter rippled through the crowd. No one dared to speak up, not because they feared causing a scene, but because it was clear how deeply these two cared for each other. Even her skeptical father managed a small nod of approval, while her mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, finally seeing what made her daughter so happy. Their vows were heartfelt and raw, filled with promises not just of love but of partnership. She spoke about how he'd taught her to see beyond wealth and titles, to value authenticity above all else. "You reminded me that I don't have to carry the weight of expectations alone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "With you, I can be myself, flaws and all, and still feel loved." He echoed her sentiments, his words steady despite the emotion welling up inside him. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were special. Not because of your success or your name, but because of the way you listen, the way you care, the way you light up a room without even trying. You make me want to be better, do better, and live better." By the time they exchanged rings, there wasn't a dry eye in the place, not even among the stoic teachers and wide-eyed students who had come to support them. Marriage didn't magically erase their differences or challenges. It simply gave them a stronger foundation to face them together. In the months that followed, they continued navigating the complexities of blending their worlds. Some days were easier than others. There were moments when old insecurities crept back in, especially during high-profile events where whispers followed them like shadows. But instead of letting those voices divide them, they leaned on each other more than ever. One evening, after attending a charity gala where cameras flashed non-stop and reporters peppered them with questions about their unlikely pairing, they retreated to their cozy home, a space they'd carefully designed to reflect both their personalities. She kicked off her heels and sank into the couch beside him, sighing heavily. That was exhausting, she admitted, rubbing her temples. "Yeah," he agreed, handing her a glass of water. "But we got through it, together." She smiled, leaning, her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever wonder why we're so different, and yet here we are," he finished for her, wrapping an arm around her. "Maybe that's the point. Our differences challenge us, push us to grow, and remind us that love isn't about being the same. It's about complementing each other." His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. They weren't just empty platitudes, they were truths they lived every single day. Whether it was debating over dinner plans or tackling bigger issues like finances and future goals, they approached everything as a team. Together, they poured their energy into projects that mattered most to them. The scholarship program flourished, helping dozens of students achieve dreams they once thought impossible. They traveled to schools across the country, speaking to young minds about resilience, hard work, and the importance of staying true to oneself. During one such trip, they visited a rural community where resources were scarce, but hope ran deep. A girl named Mia approached her shyly after a speech, clutching a notebook filled with sketches and stories. "I want to be an artist someday," Mia confessed, her cheeks flushing red. "You already are," she replied warmly, kneeling down to meet the girl's gaze. "Keep drawing, keep dreaming, and never let anyone tell you it's not worth it." Watching her interact with kids like Mia filled him with pride. He realized that her wealth wasn't just financial, it was emotional, intellectual, and deeply rooted in her desire to uplift others. And in turn, she admired his ability to connect with people on a human level. finding common ground regardless of background or circumstances. They also began mentoring couples facing similar struggles, those navigating relationships across socioeconomic divides. Through workshops and open discussions, they shared their story, emphasizing the importance of communication, trust, and mutual respect. "It's not about where you come from," she told a group of attendees during one session. "It's about where you're going and whether you're willing to go there together." Her words resonated deeply, earning nods and smiles from the audience. Many thanked them afterward, saying their story gave them hope and inspiration to keep fighting for their own relationships. Of course, life wasn't without its sacrifices. She scaled back on some of her business commitments to spend more time, focusing on meaningful causes and, more importantly, on their relationship. Meanwhile, he took on additional responsibilities within their shared initiatives, stepping out of his comfort zone to embrace leadership roles he never imagined for himself. Through it all, they made sure to carve out time for themselves. Quiet evenings at home, spontaneous road trips, and lazy Sunday mornings spent reading side by side. These moments became anchors, grounding them amidst the chaos of their busy lives. One night, under a blanket of stars, they talked about the future. "What's next for us?" she asked, tracing patterns in the sand with her finger. "I don't know," he admitted, chuckling softly. "But whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." She smiled, leaning into him. "That's all I need to hear." Years later, as they looked back on their journey, they realized something profound. Love isn't about avoiding storms. It's about weathering them side by side. Theirs hadn't been a fairy tale romance filled with glitter and glamour. It had been messy, imperfect, and sometimes downright difficult. But it had also been real, built on honesty, vulnerability, and a commitment to growing together. In the end, they proved that love transcends labels, backgrounds, and societal expectations. It's not about who you are on paper or what you bring to the table. It's about showing up, staying true, and choosing each other every single day, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. And as they sat hand in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and pink, they knew they'd found something truly priceless, a love that defied odds, broke barriers, and reminded them both that the greatest riches in life aren't measured in dollars, but in the connections we nurture and cherish, because in the end, love always wins. Life after the wedding wasn't just about grand gestures or big milestones. It was also about the little things, the everyday moments that added up to something extraordinary. They learned early on that building a life together meant finding joy in the mundane and celebrating the ordinary. For instance, mornings became their favorite part of the day. She'd wake up first, slipping out of bed quietly to make coffee while he lingered under the covers, groggy but content. By the time she returned with 2 steaming mugs, he'd be sitting up, rubbing his eyes and yawning dramatically. "You're way too cheerful for this hour," he'd tease, taking the cup from her hands. "Someone has to keep you motivated," she'd reply with a grin, settling beside him as they sipped their coffee in companionable silence. These quiet rituals, sharing breakfast, talking about their plans for the day, became anchors in their relationship, grounding them amidst the chaos of their busy lives. Evenings were different. After long days filled with meetings, phone calls, and endless to-do lists, they'd collapse onto the couch together, swapping stories about their respective worlds. Sometimes the conversations were lighthearted, like when he recounted a funny incident involving one of his students accidentally calling him dad during class. Other times they were deeper, delving into fears, frustrations, and dreams yet unfulfilled. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, she turned to him and said, "Do you ever feel like we're juggling too much? Like maybe we're trying to do too many things at once?" He thought for a moment before responding, "Yeah, sometimes, but isn't that what makes life interesting? It's not about doing everything perfectly. It's about figuring it out as we go." She nodded, appreciating his perspective. Over time, she realized that their differences weren't obstacles. They were opportunities. Where she thrived on structure and planning, he embraced spontaneity and flexibility. Together, they created a balance that worked, not perfectly, but authentically. Of course, challenges didn't disappear just because they were married. If anything, They grew more complex as their responsibilities expanded. For starters, there was the issue of balancing personal time with professional commitments. Her career demanded constant attention, with board meetings, international trips, and late-night strategy sessions becoming routine. Meanwhile, his teaching schedule kept him tied to the classroom, often leaving him drained by the end of the week. At first, it felt like they were drifting apart. Days turned into weeks without quality time together, and both began to miss the closeness they'd once shared. One evening, after a particularly long day, she found him sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. "Hey," she said softly, sitting down beside him. "What's wrong?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Nothing. Well, not really. I guess I just miss us. We barely see each other anymore, and when we do, we're so tired we don't even talk." Her heart sank. He was right. They'd let their busy schedules overshadow their relationship. Determined to fix it, they decided to set aside one evening a week as us time. No work calls, no emails, no distractions, just the two of them, reconnecting over dinner, games, or whatever brought them joy. It wasn't always easy to stick to, especially when unexpected deadlines arose or emergencies popped up. But they made it a priority, knowing that their bond was worth protecting. Slowly but surely, those evenings reignited the spark they'd been missing, reminding them why they'd fallen in love in the first place. As the years passed, they continued, growing, not just individually but as a couple. They supported each other's passions, cheering on successes and offering comfort during setbacks. When she launched a new initiative aimed at empowering women entrepreneurs, he stood proudly by her side, helping brainstorm ideas and connecting her with potential partners. In turn, she encouraged him to pursue his dream of writing a book about his experiences as a teacher, offering feedback on drafts and celebrating every completed chapter. Their shared projects also flourished. The scholarship program they'd started together had grown exponentially, impacting hundreds of students across the country. They traveled frequently to visit schools, meet beneficiaries, and host workshops designed to inspire the next generation of leaders. Along the way, they formed deep connections with families and communities, learning firsthand about the struggles and triumphs of those they served. One trip, in particular, left a lasting impression. They visited a small town where poverty was rampant but resilience shone brightly. A young boy named Ethan approached them shyly, clutching a handmade card. Inside was a simple message: "Thank you for believing in me." Tears welled up in her eyes as she hugged him tightly. Turning to her, "Partner," she whispered, "this is why we do what we do." He nodded, equally moved. Because hope is powerful, and if we can give even one person a reason to believe in themselves, then it's all worth it. Despite their successes, they weren't immune to failure. There were projects that fell through, partnerships that crumbled, and ideas that simply didn't pan out. At first, these setbacks hit hard, leaving them discouraged and questioning their abilities. But over time, they learned an important lesson. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of the process. Instead of dwelling on what went wrong, they focused on what they could learn and how they could improve moving forward. One such moment came when a major fundraising event they'd spent months organizing failed to meet its goals. Disappointed, but determined, they gathered their team to debrief, analyzing what had gone awry and brainstorming solutions for next time. "It's okay," she reassured everyone, including herself. "We'll try again, and we'll do better." Her optimism inspired those around her, proving that leadership isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about rising stronger after them. Years later, as they celebrated their 10th anniversary, they reflected on how far they'd come. Their journey hadn't been linear. It had been full of twists, turns, and detours. Yet through it all, they'd remained committed to each other and to the vision they'd built together. Sitting on the porch of the home they'd shared for nearly a decade, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Us," she replied, smiling. "How lucky I am to have found you." How grateful I am for everything we've built and everything we'll keep building. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Me too. Here's to the next chapter. And as they clinked glasses, surrounded by the warmth of a life well lived, they knew one thing for certain. Love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, staying true, and choosing each other again and again, no matter what the future holds. Because in the end, love is the greatest adventure of all.